So I'm going to review the model of the brain, and here we're seeing the medial aspect of the brain, and on this side you're seeing the outside or lateral aspect. You can see the central sulcus here, and this is the anterior side of the brain. That's the posterior. So here's the precentral gyrus, and here's the postcentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus is where you would find the motor cortex, and the postcentral gyrus is where you would find the somatosensory cortex. This whole region here is the frontal lobe. This would be the parietal lobe, and back here, this would be the occipital lobe. And on the side here, you see the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe, of course, would have the primary auditory cortex. And if we could pull down the temporal lobe inside, we would find the insula. So let's now go to the medial aspect of the brain. And first we can see the corpus callosum, which is a tract inside the brain. Its purpose is to connect the left hemisphere to the right and vice versa. If we look right here, this is the thalamus, and inside here we would find the third ventricle. The lateral ventricles, or ventricles 1 and 2, would be found within here, just deep to the corpus callosum. Students oftentimes ask what this little stub is, and that's the interthalamic adhesion. And that's not on your hit list. Moving posteriorly and inferiorly, we get to the midbrain. The structures of the midbrain that we need you to know the most are the superior and inferior colliculi, these little bumps right here. There would be a superior and inferior on the left side, and then a superior and inferior on the right side. And altogether, those four bumps would be the corpora quadrigemina, or four bodies. We also see, if we're looking at the hypothalamus, we see the epithalamus, and down here, this is the pineal gland. This is the choroid plexus that would be making cerebral spinal fluid for the third ventricle inside here. So the pineal gland is making melatonin, which is important for regulating your day-night cycles. It's shown here as number 23. Moving from the thalamus downward to the midbrain, like I said, this structure here, shown as number 34 with an arrow pointing to it, this canal is called the Cerebral Aqueduct, and it combines the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, which is shown here, this space. This area here is the pons. Again, the pons helps the medulla oblongata with respirations, but also influences micturition, urination, etc. Down here you have the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata has centers for heart rate, cardioacceleratory and cardioinhibitory, and vasomotor centers as well as respiratory centers. Here you're seeing the cerebellum, which helps coordinate movement. You're seeing the white matter branching out. All of these areas of white matter looking like a tree, it's called the arbor vitae, or tree of life. And then all these little bumps that you see, individual bumps, they're called folia. If we look at the underside of this, we can see cranial nerve number 1, the olfactory bulb, and then back here, this little stump right here that's been cut off, that's cranial nerve number 2, or the optic nerve. So olfactory bulb would be sitting in the cribriform plate, and its nerve endings would go through the olfactory foramina. This is the optic nerve, a collection of axons outside the central nervous system, and it comes back here to the optic chiasm. We only have half of it right here, where there is hemidecussation. After which, this structure right here, that represents the optic tract, a collection of axons in the central nervous system. So ahead of the optic chiasm, it's the optic nerve. Below it here in this model, it's the optic tract. Of course, on this side we can see the midbrain, we can see the pons, and down here we could see the medulla oblongata with its pyramids where decussation would be occurring, and the other cranial nerves would be coming off those regions. cranial nerve 3 and 4 off the midbrain, cranial nerves 5 through 8 off of the pons, and cranial nerves 9 through 12 will be, 9 through 12 coming off the medulla oblongata. Cranial nerve 11 technically is called a spinal accessory nerve. And that concludes the brain model.